The K-9 led the Marine back to the fire he never faced again. There was no fire anymore. No smoke rising into the cold mountain air. No sirens. No shouting. No orange glow against the snow. And yet Ash stopped. The German shepherd slowed first, his paws sinking into the powder with deliberate care. Then he froze completely, standing still on the narrow ridge as if the mountain itself had spoken a word only he could hear. Ethan did not give a command. He did not pull the leash. He simply watched as the line between them went slack in his gloved hand. The wind moved softly through the pine trees, carrying the clean scent of ice and stone. The sky above was pale, stretched thin like a held breath. Everything about the moment suggested they should keep going. But Ash did not move forward. He turned his head slightly, ears low, eyes dark and distant, not scanning for danger, not listening for instructions. He was remembering something. Ethan felt it before he understood it. That quiet pressure in the chest, that tightening behind the ribs, the same feeling that always came before he chose to walk away. Ash took one slow step backward, then another, not pulling, not panicking, just choosing a different direction. Ethan whispered his name without thinking. Ash. The dog did not respond. His body remained calm, but his breathing changed, shallow and measured, as if every step required permission from a memory buried deep inside him. His paws turned downhill, away from the marked rescue route, toward a stretch of land Ethan had not walked in years. Ethan knew this slope. He had memorized it once. Every rock, every bend, every place where the ground still looked wrong, even after time and snow tried to cover it. His pulse began to rise, steady but heavy, like something waking up after a long sleep. "We are not scheduled to be here," Ethan said aloud, though no one else could hear him. Ash stopped again. He did not look back. The silence pressed closer. Ethan swallowed and followed. Each step downhill felt heavier than the last. The air grew stiller, thicker, as if the mountain was holding on to something it had never fully released. The trees thinned, their trunks scarred and blackened beneath layers of frost. Then Ethan saw it. The outline first. A shape that did not belong. A darkness beneath the snow that refused to soften. The remains of a foundation. Stone cracked by heat. Wood reduced to brittle shadows. Ash settled near the edge of it, lowering himself into a sit, his tail wrapped close to his body. He did not whine. He did not bark. He stayed. Ethan's boots stopped just short of the blackened ground. This was where he had failed. Not because he did not try. Not because he did not love them enough. But because he had arrived too late. The memory came back in pieces, never whole. The smell of burning insulation. The way the air scraped his throat raw. The sound of his own voice calling names that never answered. He had left before he was ready. He had never come back. Ash lowered his head and pressed his nose gently into the snow, pawing once, then again. Slow, careful, not digging, just uncovering. Something small appeared beneath the white. Metal, darkened by heat. Ethan dropped to one knee without realizing it. His glove brushed the object, lifting it free. A key, warped and blackened, still threaded through a ring that should not have survived. His breath caught, sharp and sudden, as if the cold had reached inside him. He closed his fist around it. Ash moved closer, resting his head against Ethan's shoulder. His weight was warm and solid, grounding him in the present while the past breathed all around them. For the first time in years, Ethan did not turn away. He stayed. The mountain did not forgive him, but it did not push him away either. Ash remained still beside him, sharing the silence, holding space where words could not survive. Together, they stood in the place where everything had ended and where something, quietly, was allowed to begin again. The wind shifted as Ethan rose from his knee, the cold brushing against his face like a reminder that time had not stopped just because he had. Ash stood when he did, matching him without instruction, his body calm again but alert in a quieter way. The mountain seemed to exhale around them, as if it had been waiting for that moment of stillness to pass. Ethan slid the blackened key into the inside pocket of his jacket. He did not look at it again. He did not need to. The weight of it, pressed gently against his chest, not heavy, not sharp, just present. For years he had carried nothing from that night except absence. Now there was something real, something that proved the place had not been a dream he could outrun. Ash took a few steps forward, then paused, glancing back just enough to make sure Ethan was still there. His ears lifted slightly, not in alarm, but in awareness. The trail ahead curved along the ridge, narrow and uneven, dusted with snow that had not yet decided whether it would hold or slide. They moved together, slow and deliberate. Below them, the valley stretched wide and quiet, the afternoon light settling into the folds of the land. It was beautiful in the way only untouched places could be, and for a brief moment Ethan felt the old pull to keep his eyes forward, to leave the dark place behind and return to the clean lines of duty and distance. Ash stopped again. This time, he did not turn back toward the ruins. Instead, he lowered his head and sniffed the air, his tail still, his posture tense but controlled. Ethan felt it then, the subtle change in the dog's breathing, the way his focus sharpened. This was not memory. This was now. Ethan scanned the slope below them. At first he saw nothing but rock and snow and shadow. Then he noticed movement, slight and uneven, near a cluster of fallen branches at the base of the incline. Someone was there. Ethan crouched instinctively, his hand resting against Ash's shoulder. The German shepherd did not pull. He waited, muscles coiled but patient, eyes fixed on the shape below. The figure shifted again, and a low sound carried upward, barely audible over the wind. A human voice, weak and strained. Ethan's chest tightened, but this time it was different. There was no surge of panic, no rush of guilt. Just clarity. He had arrived at something that still breathed. They moved carefully down the slope, Ethan choosing each step with care, Ash leading just ahead, testing the ground before committing his weight. The figure came into focus as they closed the distance. A man, wrapped in a torn jacket, one leg pinned awkwardly beneath a fallen log. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes unfocused but open. When he saw Ash, his gaze sharpened with sudden relief. "Thought I was done," the man whispered, his voice raw. Ethan knelt beside him, checking the leg, the pulse, the signs of shock. The injury was serious but stable. Painful, but not fatal. "Not yet. You are not done," Ethan said, steady and certain. "You stayed alive long enough." Ash lay down near the man's head, close enough for the injured stranger to feel his warmth. The dog did not lick or whine. He simply stayed, his presence quiet and grounding, as if he understood that fear did not always need noise to be held back. Ethan wrapped the man's leg as best he could, speaking calmly as he worked, explaining each movement so there would be no surprises. The man listened, nodding faintly, his breathing slowing as the minutes passed. When it was done, Ethan sat back on his heels and looked at Ash. The dog met his gaze, eyes steady. Ethan understood then, with a clarity that surprised him, what Ash had done earlier on the ridge. He had not led him back to the fire to reopen the wound. He had led him there to make sure Ethan did not freeze again when it mattered. Some lessons arrived only when they could be used. As the light began to fade and the cold crept closer, Ethan reached for his radio, calling in their position, his voice calm and precise. Rescue would come. Not immediately, but in time. Ash remained where he was, between the injured man and the empty air, a silent promise that no one here would be left alone. Above them, the mountain stood unchanged, holding its scars and its truths without judgment. And this time, Ethan stayed with it. If you are still here, stay a little longer. Some moments only make sense if you do not walk away. The sound of the radio faded into the wind after Ethan finished the call. He clipped it back onto his vest and let his hand rest there for a moment longer than necessary, grounding himself in the feel of solid plastic and fabric. The injured man lay still now, his breathing shallow but steady, eyes half closed as exhaustion finally overtook fear. Ash remained close, his body angled just enough to block the worst of the cold. The German shepherd's ears flicked now and then, tracking distant sounds, but his focus never fully left the man on the ground. He had chosen this position carefully, close enough to comfort, far enough not to crowd. Ethan shifted his weight and scanned the surrounding terrain again. The light was thinning faster than he liked. Clouds were moving in from the west, low and heavy, blurring the sharp edges of the peaks. Snow would come soon, not enough to bury them, but enough to complicate everything. "You did good," Ethan said quietly, not sure whether he was speaking to Ash, the injured man, or himself. The man stirred at the sound. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then slowly finding Ethan's face. He swallowed with effort. Did not think anyone would come, he said. His voice was hoarse, as if he had not spoken in a long time. Someone always comes, Ethan replied. He surprised himself with how certain it sounded. The man let out a breath that was almost a laugh, then winced as pain caught up with him. Ash lifted his head slightly, alert to the change, then settled again when the man grew still. Minutes passed in silence. The mountain seemed to close in around them, not threatening, but intimate. The kind of quiet that forced thoughts to the surface. Ethan felt memories press in at the edges of his mind, not sharp like before, but persistent. He thought of the fire again. Not the flames, but the moments after. The waiting. The way time had stretched and twisted, every second heavy with what could not be undone. He had told himself he survived because he was strong enough to carry it. He was no longer sure that was true. Ash shifted his position, sitting up straighter. His ears lifted, his gaze fixed uphill, toward the route they had come down. Ethan followed the line of his attention, listening hard. There it was. Faint at first, then clearer. The distant thrum of rotors, barely cutting through the wind. Help was coming. Ethan felt the tension ease from his shoulders, replaced by something else. Not relief exactly. Something closer to responsibility. The kind that stayed even when the immediate danger passed. He reached into his jacket and felt the warped key again. The metal was cold, its shape familiar now in a way it had never been before. He thought about how close he had come to walking past this place again. How easily he could have followed the plan, and ignored the pull that had brought him here. Ash had not let him. The injured man shifted once more, his eyes flicking to the sky, then back to Ethan. Your dog, he murmured. He stayed. Ethan nodded. He always does. The helicopter sound grew louder, echoing off the ridges. Snow began to fall, light and dry, dusting Ash's coat and settling on Ethan's shoulders. The German shepherd did not shake it off. He remained still, present, his breath steady in the cold air. As the first searchlights cut through the clouds, Ethan felt something settle inside him. Not closure, not peace, but acceptance. He could not change what had happened in the fire. He could not go back and arrive sooner. But he could stay now. He could choose not to run when the ground beneath him turned black with memory. The rescue team would take over soon. They would lift the injured man out, secure him, carry him toward warmth and noise and life beyond the ridge. Ethan and Ash would follow, stepping back into motion after a pause that had changed more than either of them fully understood. For now, they waited. Ash remained at the man's side until the very last moment, until gloved hands reached in and careful voices replaced the silence. Only then did he rise, shaking the snow from his coat and stepping back to Ethan's side. The mountain watched as they prepared to leave. It did not ask them to forget. It only asked that they remember and keep moving forward without abandoning what had been found. This time, Ethan did. The helicopter hovered above the ridge, its sound no longer distant but present, a heavy pulse that filled the valley. Snow swirled beneath it, lifted into the air and scattered like ash. The rescue team moved with practiced calm, their voices steady, their motions deliberate, careful not to rush what still required patience. Ethan stood back with Ash at his side, giving the team space. The injured man was secured now, wrapped against the cold, his breathing monitored, his eyes opening and closing as exhaustion pulled him under. He reached out once, his hand brushing Ash's fur before the stretcher was lifted. Thank you, he said, the words barely more than breath. Ash did not move away. He stayed close until the stretcher was raised and carried toward the waiting aircraft. Only then did he step back, his posture easing as the weight of responsibility shifted to other hands. The helicopter lifted slowly, fighting the thin air, then turned away from the ridge. Its sound faded, swallowed by distance and snow, until only the wind remained. Silence returned. Ethan exhaled, a long breath he had not realized he was holding. The mountain felt different now, less tense, as if something unfinished had been carried out of it. He rested his hands on his knees and bent forward slightly, letting the cold ground steady him. Ash sat beside him, close but not pressing, his presence solid and familiar. Snow clung to his coat, melting slowly into dark patches that steamed faintly in the cold air. For a while, neither of them moved. The sky darkened, clouds lowering, the light thinning to a soft gray. Ethan knew they needed to start back soon. Night would come quickly, and the path up the slope would be more difficult in the dark. But he did not stand right away. He looked back toward the blackened ground where the ruins rested, barely visible now beneath fresh snow. The place where everything had ended still existed, even when covered, even when quiet. He had spent years avoiding that truth. "I thought if I stayed away long enough, it would stop hurting," he said softly, his voice carried away by the wind. "I thought distance would do the work for me." Ash turned his head, watching him. His eyes were steady, not questioning, not judging. "It does not work like that," Ethan continued. "Does it?" Ash did not answer. He did not need to. Ethan straightened slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his joints, the fatigue that came from more than cold and movement. He reached into his jacket and closed his fingers around the warped key once more. This time, he did not pull it out. He did not need to see it to know what it represented. It was proof of something he had tried to deny, that he had been there, that he had loved. That loss did not erase responsibility. Ash rose when he did, shaking the snow from his coat before stepping ahead, testing the ground. He paused, waiting for Ethan to follow, then began the climb back toward the ridge. Each step upward was slower than the descent had been. The slope was steep, the snow deeper now, but Ethan did not feel the same resistance inside himself. His breath found a steady rhythm, his focus narrowing to the simple work of placing one foot after the other. Halfway up, Ash stopped and looked back. Ethan was there. They continued. As they reached the ridge line, the wind picked up again, cold and sharp, but the view opened wide. The valley below was already fading into shadow, the place where they had waited now barely visible. Ethan turned once more, taking it in. He did not feel the urge to apologize to the mountain, or to beg forgiveness from what had been lost. He understood now that some things did not ask for words. They asked for presence. Ash stood beside him, facing forward, his body aligned with the path ahead. The choice was clear in the way he held himself. They were leaving, but they were not abandoning what had been found. As they began the walk back toward their route, Ethan felt a shift inside him, subtle but unmistakable. The guilt that had once driven him to move without stopping no longer held the same power. It was still there, but it no longer dictated his direction. Somewhere behind them, the ruins rested under fresh snow, quiet and unseen. Somewhere ahead, the trail waited, narrow and uncertain, but passable. Ash moved with confidence now, his steps sure, his breathing even. He had done what he came to do. Ethan followed, not because he was ordered to, not because he needed to escape, but because it was time to keep going. The mountain did not close behind them. It remained, holding its scars and its silence, while two figures moved away from it, changed in ways that could not yet be measured. They had arrived too late to save everything, but they had stayed, and for now, that was enough. They walked for a long time without speaking. The trail narrowed as it wound through the trees, snow crunching softly beneath their boots and paws. Night pressed closer now, the sky deepening into a muted blue that blurred the edges of the world. The wind eased, leaving behind a quiet, so complete it felt intentional. Ethan slowed his pace, letting his breathing settle. His body was tired, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came after something finished, not something avoided. Ash stayed just ahead of him, checking the ground, then pausing every so often to be sure Ethan was still there. They did not need to hurry. The radio crackled once, then fell silent again. The rescue team was gone. The injured man was on his way to warmth and light and hands that would take over where Ethan and Ash had stopped. That part of the night was complete. What remained was the walk back. Ethan's thoughts drifted, not sharply, not painfully, but like embers that still held heat. He thought about the way he used to move through places like this without noticing them. How he had treated terrain as something to pass through, not something that remembered. Ash slowed near a stand of trees, his posture shifting just slightly. Not alarm, not fear, something else. Ethan stopped with him. Between the trees, the ground dipped into a shallow hollow, sheltered from the wind. The snow there was thinner, disturbed by older tracks. Animal tracks. Human ones, too. Faint and weathered. Ash stepped into the hollow and circled once before sitting down. Ethan understood. They would rest here. He lowered himself onto a fallen log, the wood cold and solid beneath him. Ash settled nearby, curling into himself but keeping his head up, eyes open, alert to the quiet movements of the forest. For a moment, Ethan simply listened. The distant creak of trees shifting. The soft rush of wind higher up the slope. The steady rhythm of Ash's breathing. This is usually the part where I keep moving, Ethan said quietly. I tell myself stopping is dangerous. Ash did not look at him. His gaze stayed outward, watchful, as if guarding the space they had chosen. I thought staying meant getting stuck, Ethan continued. I thought if I stopped, everything I left behind would catch up to me. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The cold seeped through his clothes, sharp but grounding. I did not know staying could be this, he said. Ash shifted closer, their shoulders nearly touching. He did not press in. He simply closed the distance, offering warmth without demand. They stayed there as the last light faded completely, the forest darkening around them. Ethan did not check his watch. He did not count minutes. Time felt less important now, less threatening. In the quiet, he felt the weight in his chest ease, not disappear, but loosen. He understood then that what he had faced earlier was not an ending. It was a beginning he had been avoiding. The fire would always be part of him. The loss would not fade into something smaller. But it no longer had to be something he ran from. Ash lifted his head suddenly, ears forward. Ethan listened. Footsteps, faint but real, somewhere up the trail. Voices followed, distant and low, part of another search team moving through the night. They were not alone out here. Ethan felt a strange gratitude for that, not because he needed help, but because it reminded him the world kept moving, kept reaching, even when he was still. Ash stood, stretching once before stepping back onto the trail. He looked at Ethan, waiting. Ethan rose and followed. As they walked, the path ahead felt less like an escape route and more like a continuation. Something he could move along without leaving parts of himself behind. The mountain did not demand anything from them now. It simply watched as they passed through, two figures moving steadily through the dark, carrying what they had found instead of pretending it did not exist. Ash led the way, calm and sure, and Ethan stayed with him, step by step, into whatever came next. The trail widened slightly as they moved farther from the hollow, the forest thinning into open ground. The night had settled fully now, stars faint behind drifting cloud, the snow reflecting what little light remained. Ethan's steps found an easy rhythm, guided by Ash's steady pace ahead of him. Then the radio came alive. The sound cut clean through the quiet, sharp and unexpected. Ethan stopped immediately, his hand already reaching for the device clipped to his vest. Ash halted as well, turning just enough to watch him. Ethan, this is command, the voice said, calm but firm. Weather is shifting faster than expected. Visibility will drop within the hour. You are ordered to clear the mountain and return to base. The words hung in the air, heavier than the cold. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening not just to the voice, but to everything beneath it. Concern, caution, protocol, the logic of distance and safety. He pressed the transmit button. Copy, he said. His voice was even, practiced. We are on the ridge. Trail heading east. Good, the voice replied. Do not delay. Conditions are no longer favorable for extended presence. The radio went quiet again. Ash did not move. He stood facing the trail ahead, but his body was no longer aligned with it. His weight shifted back slightly, his head lowering, ears angling not in fear, but in resistance. Ethan noticed immediately. Ash, he said softly. Not a command. A question. The German shepherd turned and walked a few steps back, then stopped. He looked toward the dark slope below them, toward the stretch of mountain they had just left behind, the place where silence still mattered. Ethan felt the familiar tension rise in his chest, the old instinct to obey, to move when told, to leave because leaving was safer than staying. The order had been clear. So was the choice. He knelt in the snow, bringing himself level with Ash. The cold seeped through his pants, sharp and grounding. He placed one gloved hand against Ash's chest, feeling the steady beat beneath the fur. We have been cleared, Ethan said quietly. We are supposed to go. Ash did not pull away. He did not advance either. He simply stayed where he was, eyes steady, breathing calm, as if asking a different question altogether. Ethan understood then that this was not about disobedience. It was about timing, about knowing when leaving became another kind of abandonment. He thought of the fire again, of the moment he had turned away because there was nothing left he could do. How that decision had followed him, not because it was wrong, but because it had never been fully faced. Staying did not always mean saving someone. Sometimes it meant not turning away from what remained. Ethan rose slowly. He looked up the trail, then back toward the darkness behind them. The mountain was quiet, but not empty. It held the echo of everything that had happened there, the things he had carried without ever setting down. He keyed the radio again. "Command," he said. "We are safe where we are. We will continue movement shortly." There was a pause on the other end. Longer this time. "Ethan." The voice returned, more cautious now. "Orders stand." "I understand," Ethan replied. His tone was respectful, but resolved. "We will not stay long." The radio fell silent once more. Ash shifted, stepping closer to Ethan's side. Not ahead, not behind, beside him. The choice was made. They turned slightly, not back toward the ruins, but not fully away either. Ethan led them to a small outcropping, sheltered from the wind, where the ground dipped and the snow thinned. A place to wait, just for a moment. Ash lay down immediately, alert but relaxed, his body angled outward, guarding the space they occupied. Ethan sat with his back against stone, pulling his jacket tighter, listening to the mountain breathe around them. He did not feel defiant. He felt present. The order to leave still existed. The storm would still come. They would move again soon. But not yet. For now, they stayed, honoring the line between caution and courage, between protocol and truth. Ash rested his head on his paws, eyes open, steady. Ethan closed his eyes, just for a moment, and let himself stay with what was, without rushing toward what came next. The storm arrived without urgency, the way serious things often do. Snow began to fall again, thicker now, the flakes larger and slower, settling into the folds of the mountain with quiet persistence. The wind rose in measured breaths, not howling, not violent, but insistent enough to remind Ethan that time was moving whether he acknowledged it or not. Ash lifted his head first. His ears turned, not toward the trail or the ridge, but downhill, toward a narrow cut in the terrain where the trees grew close together. His body tensed, every line of him sharpening with attention. This was not memory. This was not resistance. This was presence. Ethan followed Ash's gaze and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, faint and uneven, a sound slipped through the wind. Not the crack of branches or the call of an animal. A human sound. Thin, broken, desperate. Ash was already moving. Ethan rose quickly, his fatigue forgotten, his focus narrowing to the path Ash had chosen. The slope was steep, slick with new snow, but Ash moved with certainty, testing each step, guiding them down through the trees. The sound grew clearer. A cry, not loud enough to carry far, just enough to be heard if someone was listening. They reached a small clearing where the ground dropped sharply into a shallow ravine. At the bottom, half sheltered by fallen branches and snow packed tight by wind, lay a figure. A woman. She was still. Her body was curled inward, arms wrapped around something she had tried to protect. Snow had settled on her hair and shoulders, softening the shape of her, but there was no mist at her mouth. No movement. Ethan's chest tightened, the familiar ache returning, but he did not stop. Ash moved closer, careful now, his steps slow and deliberate. From beneath the woman's arm, a small face emerged, red with cold, eyes wide and unfocused. A child, barely conscious, breathing shallow, but present, alive. Ethan dropped to his knees beside them, his movements steady, controlled. He checked the woman first, though he already knew. Her skin was cold, her body rigid in a way that left no room for hope. She stayed. Ethan said softly, the words barely more than breath. Ash lay down beside the child, pressing his body close, offering warmth without fear. The child's eyes flicked toward him, and a weak hand reached out, fingers brushing fur. Ethan pulled his jacket free and wrapped it carefully around the child, shielding small hands and feet from the wind. He spoke quietly as he worked, not because the child could understand every word, but because sound itself mattered. "You are not alone," he said. "You stayed long enough." The child whimpered once, then went still again, exhaustion pulling him toward sleep. Ethan looked back at the woman. There was nothing left to save. The truth of it settled heavy and unavoidable. They had arrived too late. He felt the old instinct rise, the urge to turn away, to move on before the weight of it pressed too deep. But Ash did not move. He stayed where he was, body curved protectively around the child, head lowered, eyes steady. Ash understood something Ethan was only just learning. Staying was not measured by outcomes. It was measured by presence. Ethan reached for his radio, his fingers stiff with cold. "Command," he said clearly. "We have located a child. One adult deceased. The child is alive and hypothermic. We need immediate evacuation." The reply came quickly this time, the urgency unmistakable. "Coordinates received. We are redirecting assets now. Hold position." Ethan released the radio and turned his attention back to the child, adjusting the jacket, blocking the wind as best he could with his own body. Snow continued to fall, gathering on his shoulders, melting slowly where it met. Warmth. He did not look away from the woman again. He bowed his head slightly, not in ceremony, not in apology, but in acknowledgement. "You did everything you could," he said quietly. Ash remained still, sharing his warmth, his breath slow and steady. The child's breathing began to even out, shallow but regular, held between exhaustion and hope. The sound of rotors cut through the storm minutes later, growing louder, closer. Lights swept across the clearing, bright and sharp against the snow. The rescue team moved quickly, voices calm, practiced. They lifted the child gently, securing him against the cold. Ash stayed close until the last moment, until careful hands took over, until warmth was promised. As the helicopter lifted, snow scattering beneath it, Ethan stood beside Ash, watching it disappear into the storm. They had not saved everyone. The mountain did not offer that mercy, but they had saved what remained. Ash leaned into Ethan's leg, not seeking comfort, but offering it. Ethan placed a hand on his head, fingers pressing gently into familiar fur. "I know," he said. The storm continued to fall around them, quiet and unyielding. And for the first time, Ethan did not feel the need to leave immediately. They stayed long enough to honor what had been lost. Then, together, they turned back toward the trail, carrying what could be carried, leaving nothing unseen. The mountain grew quiet again after the helicopter disappeared into the storm. Snow continued to fall, softer now, as if the land itself was easing its breath. The clearing where they had stood moments before began to lose its sharp edges, the ground slowly smoothing over what had happened there. The woman lay still beneath a thin layer of white, her outline already becoming part of the landscape. Ethan did not rush away. He stood with Ash beside him, both of them facing the place where the child had been lifted into the light. The air felt heavy, not with danger, but with truth. This was what remained when urgency passed, and nothing more could be done. Ash lowered his head and sniffed the ground once, then stepped back toward Ethan. He did not linger near the woman. He did not circle or pace. He had already understood what Ethan was still learning to accept. Some endings did not ask to be fixed. They asked to be witnessed. Ethan knelt, slowly, resting one hand against the cold earth. He did not pray. He did not search for words that could make sense of loss. He simply stayed long enough to let the moment be real. "I see you," he said quietly. Ash remained close, his body a steady presence at Ethan's side. Snow gathered on his back, melting into his fur, darkening it in uneven patches. He did not shake it off. They stayed there for a little while longer, until the cold pressed deeper and the storm reminded them that movement was still necessary. Ethan rose at last, his body stiff but steady, and turned back toward the trail. Ash stepped ahead, leading without hesitation. The path back was quieter than before. No voices, no radio calls, just the sound of snow beneath their steps and the slow rhythm of breathing. Ethan felt changed in a way that did not demand explanation. The guilt he carried had not vanished, but it no longer ruled him. He had stayed when it mattered. That knowledge settled into him, not as pride, but as peace. As the trees closed around them, Ethan glanced once more over his shoulder. The clearing was already fading, the storm reclaiming it, holding the woman with the same silence it held everything else. Nothing was erased. Nothing was forgotten. Ash continued forward, calm and certain, guiding them through the dark. Ethan followed, not because he needed to escape what lay behind them, but because he had honored it. They did not save everyone. The mountain did not promise that, but they had saved what could be saved, and they had stayed. For now, that was enough. Morning came quietly. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the mountain washed clean, the snow smooth and unbroken except for a single trail leading away from the trees. Pale light settled over the ridge, soft and forgiving, as if the land itself had decided to rest. Ethan and Ash stood at the edge of the trail, looking out over the valley below. Nothing looked different, and yet everything was. The place where they had stopped the night before was already hidden, folded back into the mountain's long memory. The woman, the child, the waiting, all of it remained, not as wounds left open, but as truth that had been seen and carried. Ash sat beside Ethan, his posture relaxed, his breathing slow. The tension that once lived in him had eased. He was still alert, still aware, but no longer burdened by the need to hold everything together alone. Ethan rested his hands on his knees and let the cold air fill his lungs. For years, he had believed survival meant moving on, leaving places behind, outrunning what hurt. Now he understood something different. Survival sometimes meant staying long enough to honor what could not be saved. Ash rose first, stepping onto the trail with calm certainty. He did not look back. He did not need to. Ethan followed. Each step forward felt deliberate, not rushed, not heavy. The mountain did not demand anything from them now. It simply watched, silent and steady, as two figures moved away from it with quieter hearts. They had not saved everyone. They had not arrived in time to change every ending. But they had stayed when it mattered. And sometimes, that was the only miracle there was. Ash walked on, leading with the same quiet faith that had carried him through loss and silence. Ethan stayed beside him, no longer afraid of what followed him from the past. Some stories did not end in victory. They ended in grace. And that was enough. Some stories do not end with answers. They end with someone choosing to stay. If this moment stayed with you, you are welcome to subscribe and walk with us through stories like this, one quiet step at a time. If you wish, leave a comment with a single word, here. The next story is waiting whenever you are ready to listen.